It started the way most things do, with something small. A paper cup warm between my fingers and a name spelled correctly on the side. That was the first time I noticed him. Not just saw him, but noticed him. I'd been coming to that cafe on Willow Street for over 6 months, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays around 8:30. I'd order the same drink, medium vanilla latte, half sweet, extra hot, and sit by the window with my planner, pretending to be more organized than I really was. Sometimes I'd write lists I never followed or doodle in the margins while the coffee cooled. He wasn't the only barista there, but he was the one who didn't try too hard. No performative friendliness, no over-rehearsed greetings, just a quiet presence behind the counter, steady and unhurried. He had kind eyes, the kind that didn't need to smile to feel warm, and a way of remembering details others missed. One Thursday morning, when I stepped up to order, he looked at me and said, "Medium vanilla latte, half sweet, extra hot, right?" I blinked. "Yes, how did you—" "You always order it," he said simply, already reaching for the cup. "You sit by the window and read that green notebook." I looked down at the planner in my hand, surprised he'd noticed. "I guess I'm a creature of habit." He smiled. "Aren't we all?" He didn't ask for my name. He didn't need to. It was already there, written in neat handwriting across the side of the cup, spelled correctly for once. That morning, the drink tasted better than usual. Or maybe it was just that someone had paid attention. I wasn't used to that. Not in a long time. I didn't tell anyone about the exchange. It wasn't a story, not yet. Just a moment. But something about it stayed with me as I walked to my car, as I answered emails at my desk, as I stood in the kitchen later that night stirring soup for one. The next time I went in, he didn't ask for my order. Just nodded as I approached and started making it. He was wearing a navy beanie pulled low over his ears, and there was a small ink stain on his wrist. Music played softly overhead, some lo-fi beat I didn't recognize, but the cafe was otherwise quiet. When he handed me the drink, he said, "You always hold it with both hands first, like you're warming yourself before a storm." I laughed under my breath, caught off guard. "Is that how it looks?" He shrugged. "It's not a bad thing. Some people just need warmth more than others." I took the drink and sat in my usual spot, but I didn't open my planner. I just stared out the window, watching the city wake up, wondering why a barista I barely knew seemed to see me more clearly than people I'd known for years. Maybe it was nothing. But maybe it was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. The next few weeks passed with a strange kind of rhythm, one that didn't ask for attention, but made itself known all the same. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I returned to the cafe, and every time he was there. He never asked for my name, but I noticed he'd written it on the cup anyway. Always spelled right. Always in the same neat handwriting. There was something oddly comforting about it, as if he'd gently placed me into the story of his mornings without asking for permission. One morning, the weather had turned unexpectedly cold, the kind of chill that cuts through sleeves and settles into your bones. When I walked in brushing raindrops from my coat, he looked up from behind the espresso machine and said, "You look like you needed that, even before you stepped through the door." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" He nodded toward the window. "It's a gray kind of day." I added cinnamon. "Hope that's okay." I blinked. You added, "Just a pinch. You seem like someone who likes small surprises as long as they're warm." It wasn't the cinnamon that caught me off guard. It was the observation. Gentle, unassuming, but somehow accurate. I took the cup and held it, as I always did, with both hands before the first sip. He watched me do it and smiled without saying a word. That day, instead of sitting by the window, I chose a seat near the back. Still quiet, still out of the way, but from there I could watch the counter without feeling like I was watching. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly where things belonged. Every interaction was brief but thoughtful. He remembered other people's names too, an older man with a service dog, a student who always asked for oat milk, a woman who ordered tea and never touched it. He didn't perform kindness. He just offered it like it cost him nothing. I realized then how rare that was. As I stood to leave that day, he caught my eye across the room and said, "See you Thursday." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't casual either. It was something else, something simple, steady, quietly attentive. And I found myself saying yes. Thursday. It wasn't a date. It wasn't anything, not really. But as I stepped outside and felt the rain settle into my coat, I held the cup tighter, the faint trace of cinnamon still lingering on my tongue, and I wondered what it meant when a stranger starts to notice the things you've stopped pointing out about yourself. That Thursday, I didn't go to the cafe. It wasn't intentional. I'd woken up late, a call from work had pulled me straight into a spiral of meetings and deadlines, and by the time I looked at the clock, it was already past 11. The morning was gone. My planner sat unopened on the dining table, and my tea brewed quickly. At home had gone cold before I'd even taken a sip. It should have been a normal day. It had all the right markings of one. But something about it felt off. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, it was just coffee, just a place I went, just a person who remembered my order. That's all. But that evening, as I walked past the cafe on my way to the pharmacy, I paused. The chairs had already been stacked. Lights inside were dimmed. A few employees lingered, sweeping and wiping counters. And then I saw him, through the glass behind the counter, restocking cups. He looked up just as I glanced in. Our eyes met for half a second, no more, and I raised a hand instinctively, not even sure why. To my surprise, he smiled and waved back. I should have kept walking. I almost did. But my feet carried me forward, and before I knew it, I'd pushed open the door. "Hey," I said, suddenly unsure of why I was there. He straightened up. "Hey, you all right?" I nodded. "Just passed by. Realized I missed my stop this morning." He leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "I noticed." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Didn't think anyone would." He looked at me, calm, steady. "You're part of the rhythm here. When something's missing, you feel it." His words landed softer than I expected, but they lingered. I didn't know how to respond. "I can make you one to go if you still want it," he said. "Vanilla latte, half sweet, extra hot." "Right," I smiled. "With cinnamon now, apparently." He chuckled and turned to start the machine. We didn't talk much while he made it. The cafe was quiet, humming with the end-of-day stillness. When he handed me the cup, his fingers brushed mine. Not in a deliberate way, just enough to notice. I took a sip. "Still perfect." He nodded. "You seem tired today." "I am," I said honestly. "You don't have to say why." That sentence, that permission, did something to me. It was rare, the kind of understanding that doesn't ask for explanation. I hadn't realized how much I needed it. As I left the cafe, the air had turned cooler. I held the cup close to my chest, the warmth familiar now, like something waiting each time to be claimed. I walked home slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because something in me had shifted. A small realization that maybe this wasn't about coffee anymore. Maybe it never had been. It was a Tuesday when something shifted again, though not in any loud or obvious way. Just a quiet rearrangement of space and routine. I had arrived a little earlier than usual, the cafe still echoing with morning stillness. The usual rush hadn't begun yet, just a few regulars hunched over their laptops or murmuring into phones. I ordered, as I always did, and took my seat by the window. A few minutes later, he walked over, not with a drink, but with his own. No apron, no name tag, just a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He slid into the chair across from me and held up his cup like a peace offering. "I've got 10 minutes, he said. "Mind if I sit?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want him to, but because no one ever did that. Not in my quiet, structured mornings, not in the routines I'd built to keep people just far enough away. but I nodded. Sure. We sat in a silence that didn't ask to be filled. Outside, a delivery truck idled at the curb, and a woman with a red scarf crossed the street slowly. The world moved around us, but inside that moment, everything felt still. He glanced at my planner, then back at me. Do you actually use that thing, or is it just for decoration? I smiled. Mostly lists I don't follow. It makes me feel organized even when I'm not. He took a sip from his cup. I used to do that with music journals. Write songs I never finished, lyrics I never sang out loud. I raised an eyebrow. You're a musician, used to be, he said. Before rent and bills made other things more urgent. There was a quiet vulnerability in the way he said it, and I felt something inside me soften. I used to paint, I offered. Not well, but often. He looked surprised, but not in a way that dismissed it. What happened? Life, I said. Routine, loss. I don't know. It just faded. He nodded slowly. Funny how the things that once made us feel most alive are the easiest to let go when no one's looking. I didn't reply right away. His words hung in the air between us, delicate and true. I think we forget we're allowed to start again, I said quietly. He looked at me, not the way people look when they're curious, but when they're listening. I'm glad you came in that night, he said, eyes steady. The one you missed your morning. So am I admitted. A bell chimed behind the counter, signaling the end of his break. He stood, lingering for a moment. Same time Thursday, he asked. It wasn't about the drink anymore. We both knew that. I nodded. Same time. And after he left, I looked down at my planner at the open page of empty lines, and for the first time in months, I wrote something real. Thursday came with clear skies and the kind of late summer light that makes everything feel softer. I walked to the cafe with less urgency that morning, my steps slower, more aware. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything, but part of me was already scanning the counter as I opened the door. He was there, as always, but this time when he saw me, he didn't go straight for the espresso machine. Instead, he reached below the counter and pulled out a small paper bag folded neatly at the top. I have something for you, he said, holding it out. I raised an eyebrow as I took it. Should I be worried? Only if you hate lemon poppy seed muffins. I blinked, caught off guard. I mentioned that once. Weeks ago. You said it reminded you of your grandmother's baking, he said simply. You smiled when you said it. I remembered. I opened the bag slowly. Inside was a single muffin, still warm, wrapped in a square of parchment paper. It looked imperfect, slightly lopsided, a little golden around the edges, but it smelled exactly like memory. I looked up at him, unsure what to say. No one had done something like that for me in a long time. Remembered something small. Chosen to act on it. Thank you, I said, and my voice sounded quieter than I expected. He smiled, then handed me my usual drink. You want to sit in the back today? It's quieter. We did. The cafe was just beginning to fill the noise of espresso machines and footsteps blending into a gentle background hum. We sat across from each other at the same small table as before, and for a few minutes we didn't speak. I broke off a piece of muffin, took a sip of coffee, let the moment settle. Then I asked, why do you do that? He looked up. Do what? Notice things. Remember things. Go out of your way. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, because most people don't. And I know what it's like to feel invisible, to walk through a day and wonder if anyone actually sees you. The truth of it hit me like a breath I didn't know I was holding. I met his eyes. I see you. He nodded, barely a smile. And I see you. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It wasn't flirtation. It was something quieter, something older. Recognition. Two people who had long since accepted certain silences in their lives, realizing maybe they didn't have to anymore. When I left the cafe that day, I carried the empty muffin bag folded carefully in my purse, as if it were something more than what it was. And maybe it was, because sometimes it's not the grand gestures that change us, it's the small, intentional ones. It was a Friday evening, one of those late summer nights when the air is warm but carries just enough of an edge to remind you that the season is slipping. I wasn't expecting to see him. I'd stopped by the bookstore down the street, something I hadn't done in a while. I wandered the aisles, slowly running my fingers along spines, pretending I had all the time in the world. When I stepped out, arms cradling a slim paperback and the beginnings of twilight in the sky, I saw him. He was sitting on a bench near the curb, earbuds and head tilted back like he'd been listening to something soft. No uniform, no apron, just jeans, a faded t-shirt, and a kind of stillness I hadn't seen in him before. He looked up and smiled as if he'd been waiting, though I knew he hadn't. "Hey," he said, pulling out an earbud. "Bookstore run?" I held up the paperback. "Old habits." He patted the space beside him. "You've got good timing." I hesitated only for a second, then sat. The street was quiet, the cafes around us just beginning to fill with evening chatter. Across from us, a couple walked their dog in lazy loops around a tree. A breeze stirred the hem of my shirt. "You ever listen to music just to feel something old again?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Sometimes I listen just to remember who I was." He nodded, slowly, like that made sense to him. Then, without turning to look at me, he said, "I almost didn't take the job at the cafe. I was burnt out, tired of people. But something told me to stay, to watch, to pay attention." I glanced at him. "You're good at that. I didn't expect to meet someone like you," he said, his voice quieter now. "And I don't mean that in some dramatic, sweeping way. I just mean it's rare to find someone who makes quiet feel full." I didn't answer right away. I felt it again, that moment of tipping, like standing at the edge of something soft but real. No promises, no declarations, just truth. "This isn't what I thought my life would look like," I said. He looked at me, then fully. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I smiled faintly. "Ask me again in a year." We sat there until the sun dipped below the buildings and the city turned golden around us. When we stood, he didn't reach for my hand. He didn't try to kiss me. He just walked beside me, close, but not pressing, the kind of closeness that says, "I'm here and I'll be here tomorrow too." And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't afraid of what might come next. Sunday morning came quietly, with soft sunlight pressing through the curtains and the hush of a city not quite awake. I moved slowly through my routine tea toast, a half-hearted attempt at reading the paper. But my mind kept drifting back to the night on the bench, to the calm in his voice, to the space he'd given me without asking for anything in return. Around 9:30, I found myself walking toward the cafe without even deciding to. The streets were warm with early light, and the windows of the shop were just beginning to fog slightly from the steam inside. When I stepped through the door, he was already there, leaning on the counter, a towel slung over his shoulder. He looked up, smiled, not surprised, not expectant, just present. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He handed me the usual, without asking. "Extra cinnamon today," he said. Seemed right. I laughed softly. "You always know?" There weren't many people around yet, so I stayed. I took my seat by the window, and after a few minutes he joined me with his own cup, pulling the chair out like it had been waiting for him. We didn't say much. There was nothing that needed explaining. But at some point, I reached out and touched his hand, just lightly, just long enough. "I don't know what this is," I said, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." His eyes met mine. "Me neither." And that was it. Not a kiss, not a promise, just an understanding. A quiet agreement to keep showing up, to keep noticing, to keep seeing, As we sat there, sunlight rising on the polished floor and the city coming to life outside the glass, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not because everything made sense, but because something inside me finally did. And maybe that's all we ever really need. If you've been listening and felt even a small flicker of recognition of being seen or remembered or quietly cared for, I hope you carry that with you today. Leave a comment if this story reminded you of a time when someone surprised you with their attention or showed up in a way you didn't expect. And if you'd like more stories like this one's full of quiet moments, unexpected connection, and the kind of hope that grows slowly, please consider subscribing. Thanks for spending time with me. Until next time.